Hey, it's Sarah Burke here from the Women in Media podcast. And before we get started on a new episode, could I get you to hit like, follow, subscribe, hit the bell, whichever app you do your podcast listening in. Make sure you're all set up so you know when there's a new episode and you can help spread the word. Oh, and if you're so inclined, could I ask you to leave a review if the app that you're using does that? You're the best. All right, let's get to the show. I'm Sarah Burke, and this is the Women in Media podcast. My guest today is an award-winning journalist and the weekend anchor of Global National, Farah Nasser. How are you?
Good. How are you?
I'm good. I feel like it's such a small world. I had been speaking with your global news team through email to have you on the podcast, and then my former roommate, who was just on a recent episode, nominated you to come on at the end, saying that your story is nothing short of incredible and that you would have great things to share here. So,
that's so
thank
nice.
you.
That is so great.
For anyone who's like, wait, what? Who's the former roommate? That's Morgan Campbell. So you've actually gone through quite a transition in the last year, and maybe that's where we start. On this podcast, we're talking about the things that are sometimes uncomfortable to talk about, being in the spotlight and finding the boundaries between personal life and professional life. What led to the switch to weekend anchor for you?
I think I had outgrown local anchoring. I had felt for a while that that the position that I had deserved somebody who was, really excited about it. And I just felt like I'd done it for a while, and I'd been in local news for so long, and national was just so interesting to me. I mean, the issues that you cover, the type of think pieces that you cover are very different than you would on a local level. So, I think it was kind of time. It was time to make a change and to move on and to learn again. I think that was the biggest thing. I felt like I was a bit complacent. I wasn't learning as much as I wanted. And this past year has been such an education, and I've gotten many things wrong, and it's been great to be able to, grow your brain.
I totally feel you on that, on the becoming stagnant thing. The second you're not challenged, right? Like you do not perform the same way.
No.
How about family life and taking on like a huge weekend job? That must be kind of tough for you.
Yeah, it's not, look, it's not easy. It's the weekends. There's been a silver lining in the sense that, I could go to field trips and, go to skating with my daughter in her class and skiing and do things during the week and take my son to hockey. So those are things that I always would miss. Make dinner because I'd be home at like 7. So I'd miss that. I would come home and then the kids would go to bed. But now I'm able to to be present during the week, and it's a gift. And I'm also working a 4-day week, which is Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. And that has been life-changing.
Interesting.
I wish everybody would do that in every industry. I think it makes such a big difference. It's helped my mental health. It's been great for my family. And on the weekends, my husband has the kids completely, which is great because during the week he's, work mode. And so on the weekend, he can just do whatever he wants with them, and they have their time. And
Does your husband also work in the industry?
Absolutely not. Okay. I don't think I could be with somebody who worked in the industry, to be honest. Yeah. No, he works in tech. He works but he's super interested in the news. I think he actually reads probably more news than I do in the morning. He wakes up, he reads, all the papers and The Economist and everything. He's more, sometimes he's a bit more, he knows more than I do. Like he'll be like, did you guys cover this? And I'm like, where did you even find this? So he's I think inside his heart, he's a producer, but no.
And then an hour later, you're pitching it in the news.
Yeah. Always.
Love
he has
it.
great pitches. Yeah. I'm very lucky.
You mentioned though that coming to the weekend gig, that you learned a lot of lessons along the way and started learning again. What are some of those things?
I think I'm a lot easier on myself, and I think I have more confidence in who I am. I'm not trying to be someone else. I'm not trying to be, the perfect anchor. I've given myself permission to kind of be me. Mm-hmm. I used to, in interviews, just really script questions and really stick to them and be worried about, I'm missing something. And now I'm more in the moment and in the conversation. And if I miss it, I miss it. I kind of forgive myself for it. I'm not as hard on myself. I think those are the few things. I think I'm easier around the people around me that I work with. I think I had a high barometer and high expectation from a lot of people. And now I think through the pandemic, I've kind of understood a bit more about how everybody's on their own journey and dealing with their own stuff, and not everything's always going to be perfect.
Yeah. So in learning about giving yourself grace, you're now giving grace to others.
Yeah, it's a good way to look at it, right?
Newsrooms I mean, I've heard a lot of stories over the years. I actually started in broadcast journalism myself. They can be toxic places for women. How was your experience coming up in the ranks? Like, where was your first gig?
Oh, good question. My first gig was at Rogers Cable when I was 17 or 18. I was a co-op student and they put me on air right away. And
Which market?
Mississauga.
Nice.
So that was an interesting thing to just kind of be thrown to the wolves and I don't think anybody was really watching Rogers news on Rogers back then, but to me, I thought the whole world was watching, and it was everything I did was so important. So that was unique, and it was, and you're volunteering, right? So I was a co-op student, so you're not getting paid, you're working all these hours, so it can be pretty intense.
It's always felt like such a fight, I think, for women to get their piece of the pie, whether it is like an anchoring gig or like that primetime reporting gig or whatever it is. Did you find you experienced any of that?
Yeah, I mean, I think I experienced it to some level at every newsroom I worked in. I worked at 1010 at CFRB 1010, a radio station, and most of the people I worked with were male. There was so few. I think there was one female host during the weekdays, and I produced for two hosts for the weekend, and even they struggled. Like it's not easy, especially talk radio. It wasn't a place where there was a lot of women, and certainly not women producers, and certainly not women of color. So that was a really I would say that was challenging to start, but I didn't know anything different. I had no idea that this was that there were other places where there were women leaders. I didn't even think about it. It wasn't even in my consciousness. I mean, that was also a time where I never would have thought I'd be a news anchor, let alone a national news anchor. So that was just kind of how things were. When you look back now, you think, okay, some of that stuff was problematic, and assumptions that were made about you or things like that. And then I worked at City TV, which was quite rock and roll. Is
that the rock and roll newsroom? That's a thing?
Oh, City TV. Well, I don't know if rock and roll is the right word. It was, well, there was no HR department, put it that way. So okay. It was kind of like anything went. But there was, the female and male anchor were treated very differently. Like there was a lot of amazing female reporters who I'm still friends with today, who were helpful to me at that time. And then, I mean, where I work now, I think it has even changed, even global. There was a lot of it was very male dominated, and that's changed. We have a lot of women in leadership now.
Mm-hmm. When did you start with Global?
2015. Yeah, so it's been, I think it'll be 8 years soon. Yeah.
And coming into that 5-6 p.m. anchor position, that's a coveted spot, right?
Yeah, totally.
Who was the first person in Global who made you feel empowered that you deserve that role?
I think it was both my bosses. I had a news director named Mackay Taggart, and the guy who's in charge of the entire news department, his name is Ward Smith, and we'd been in touch for years before even he hired me. So he'd known about me for a long time, and I was pregnant when they called me to meet them at the Shangri-La for a drink to discuss, the role, because the anchor he had a PR company on the side. They got Leslie Roberts. He got fired. They were looking for somebody. And I remember the same day, I think it was the same day I saw the positive pregnancy test. It was the same day I got an email from Mackay, who I'd worked with at 1010, who said, do you want to come? We'd love to meet with you to talk about this role. And I'm like, oh, wow, this is a dream role, but I'm pregnant. How would this even work? So I went to drinks and I had water, and they were like, to have a glass of wine. I'm like, oh no, I don't.
So you didn't disclose it?
No, I couldn't. I had to just. I mean, it was. I just found out. I hadn't even told my parents. Just my husband knew, so I couldn't tell these guys. And then we went. I thought, you know what, we'll go further in the talks, and if it comes up, it has to come up. And then we kept going, and I got closer and closer, and I was getting bigger and bigger, because with your second, you start showing, a lot earlier.
And these companies take forever as well. So it's it's 2 months later now.
Yeah, true. Exactly. And now I'm pretty pregnant. So anyway, but I was still hiding it. I didn't even tell anybody at CP24 where I worked that I was pregnant. And then, we did the audition. It went really well. I got along really well with my co-anchor, who I'd also known from the fields, Alan Carter. And then they offered me the job, and I I had no idea what to do. Like I'm like, I have to, and everybody had said to me, you don't have to tell them, they don't have to know. But I just couldn't. I'm somebody who I don't lie. Like I wear my heart on my sleeve and I'm honest to a fault. Um, yeah, which is sometimes problematic. Some people don't like you sometimes when you're too honest, but I'm that's just how I operate. So, I called Ward and I said, look, I'm not going to sue you. You totally have an out. I'm pregnant. And if you want me with my kid. But if you don't, no hard feelings. But just so you know, my child is the priority, not this job. So if you still want me, let's do this. Otherwise, I'm sure there's a lot of people who want this role.
I love how you handled that.
Yeah, I mean, it's what the reality was. And then I knew that I wasn't going to be this, mom who wasn't going to be there for her kid. Like that wasn't an option. So he didn't even hesitate. He's like, no, we've wanted you for years at this network. And this is, they'd offered me jobs in the past and this is what we want you for. So I took the job and I volunteered to take a very short mat leave, which in hindsight, I probably regret a little bit, but they didn't force me, but I took a very, very short mat leave. I think it was like 11 weeks. And yeah, I remember pumping in the makeup room. And if you ever heard of breast pump, it's like the weirdest noise. It's like, and like guys are coming in, the meteorologists, guys are coming getting their makeup done. And I'm just like wearing something on top so they can't see my breasts and just filling milk. And, but I would go back between, so it was good in a way because I would be able to be with my daughter all day. And then I would go do the show, pump, and then I would come back. So but it was hard because you gained all this weight emotionally, you're a wreck.
You become a different person.
You become a different person and you're just
in that experience.
Totally. And you're on TV. So you'd watch yourself and you'd be like, oh my God, is this my body? Is this what I look like? Like it was just, and nobody made me feel like that at all. But I had that myself. Yeah.
Well, and I mean, not to mention, we've been conditioned to think and feel this way, especially in this industry.
Totally.
Yeah, so society aside.
and forgetting the industry, I mean, the viewers, like there's some viewers who are really nasty, who say such mean things. And I mean, I was recently asked if I was pregnant with my third, so by a viewer. So, but it's fine. It doesn't. I've developed a very thick skin over the years, but there are people who, because you're in their homes, they feel like they know you. And the beautiful positive side to that is such kindness and love and empathy. And people are just so wonderful. But there is another side to that where people think they can say whatever they want to you. So yeah, so that was hard a little bit when I was pregnant. But yeah, sorry, I answered that in a really long way.
Oh my God, don't say sorry. It's a podcast. You just go, you talk.
So I think those two, I mean, they were guys, but they were in my corner. Like they helped me. They knew that I was going to be a mom. Like, I mean, they even talked. They're like, do you want us to build a nursery near the newsroom? Like, do you want us to, what can we do to help you? It was always like, how can we make your life easier? And then it got to a point where, I needed to start doing shoots and then things escalated and I had to, but at the beginning they were so understanding.
So how many months pregnant would you have been when you actually started the job?
Oh God. So I think I started in July, or I was born in October. So I would say like a good 6 months. So they introduced me to their staff and I'm like huge by then. Right. And
how did that go with your colleagues, men or women?
Yeah, that was hard because I think and it was hard for them. I mean, they just had an anchor who had a PR company on the side. Our ratings were amazing. And then he left and they totally dipped. And, they're feeling like what's happening with our show. And then they hire me and I'm pregnant. And I'm like, guys, I'm going to go for a few weeks too. And I had to go on bed rest before. So I worked like, I think 2 or 3 weeks, maybe a month. And then I had to go on bed rest for the rest of my pregnancy. And I was like, can we just put can we put the studio, back then before COVID, there was this couldn't happen. But,
yes.
I was like, can we set something up in my house? And, and they're like, no, that doesn't, I don't know that's not even possible. Nobody can do that. And now, of course, that happened after. But it was hard for my colleagues because they needed a leader. They needed an anchor, literally. And here I was leaving. But my co-anchor, Alan Carter, God bless that guy. He has, even to this day, he's not even he has my back anytime. Like he held the fort. He did everything. So
yeah. How has your experience been with other women?
Yeah, that's been interesting. You know, it's funny. I hadn't really had a mentor, a female mentor, until maybe like 3 or 4 years ago. Um, I had colleagues that, would give me a bit of guidance, but they were doing their own thing too. And a lot of them were moms and trying to get by and survive. And then I had female bosses who were really tough and didn't have that kind of empathy and were like, suck it up. I remember being somewhere where I was with a bunch of, leaders in news, and they were making fun of a correspondent who called in sick because she had her period. And they were just like, yeah, they were just like, she's never going to go anywhere. Or in my head, I was like, well, I work through them, but I should be off. You know what I mean? I get what this
Yeah.
person is going through. Like, that's hard. If it,
Yeah.
I don't think they're making it
Do
up.
you
Like,
speak up in those situations before you continue? Sorry.
I didn't then. I didn't then. I took it all in. I didn't know how to speak up then, because those environments, I wasn't in a leadership role. I was a cog in the wheel. I was a reporter. Now, I 100% speak up. Now
You found that
stuff
voice,
doesn't get by. But people don't say these things to me, I guess, now anymore, because they know.
Yeah.
But back then, I just kind of took it in, and I learned, and it was really hard because also these like other news female leaders. I was in an executive's office once, and there was some international story, and she was trying to get one of her foreign correspondents to go to cover the story, and the correspondent was like, well, it's my son's birthday and I can't, we planned a whole party. And she hung up with that correspondent, and she was like, well, I'm never going to ask her for a foreign assignment again. And it's hard because as a mom now, I know, I mean, how, like, my son's birthday's coming, like how much work you put into, like, you can't not be there for something like that, no matter what's happening in the news.
That'd be heartbreaking.
It's heartbreaking, right? Like, if it was a huge story, maybe like my husband would have to, but even that, I wouldn't want to go. I wouldn't want to leave. Like, it'd be hard to do that. So in any case, I feel like people were not targeting me specifically, but hearing how they spoke about other women, and it was always kind of like, you're not one of those, you work so hard, you're not one of those, but this person's like this person's like this. And now I look back, and it's I think it just perpetuated the problem that women have in news and newsrooms, right? That we carry this heavy load. And I don't expect men to understand, because they're not going through it. So I don't expect them to fully get the load that women carry, that mothers carry, that, the extra load. They probably get it in a way, but they would never get it as we would get it, right? But women, you'd think would understand it because they've been there, right? Like, they've had young kids, or they know, or they've seen their own mother or whatever. Like, and I feel like sometimes women are sometimes,
We have to be kinder.
yeah, they could be kinder. Exactly.
So recently, like I noticed a post that you shared, and it was basically like a note written to viewers saying thank you for your concerns because you had stepped away and taken a leave for a little bit. I love how you were so like forthcoming about, what you were going through personally. Can you talk a little bit about what was going on behind the scenes there? Because I think like you've been really like forthcoming about mental health, and that's the piece I'm very interested to hear about, like why you finally shared.
Yeah. And you know what? It's funny because it's not finally, like, I would talk to anybody who'd listen about mental health. Like, I guess I just didn't do it on a public forum, but I totally would have if I'd been asked to. It's something that, so just to give a bit of a backstory, there was a family health issue, which I don't want to get into, which took place in November. And I took a step back to be there for my family member. And, but going through that, a lot of stuff came up for myself.
Interesting.
This was a really serious health situation. And I had lost a child. I had a twin who passed away. And so I hadn't really dealt with that when I had, after I gave birth, I took mat leave, I went back to work, I had another kid, I took a short mat leave, I came back to work. So it was just kind of, I describe it as like a train that just keeps going, and there's nowhere to get off. So you're not processing things. And for some reason, I guess, because I was forced to step back because of what was happening in my family, it just allowed me to kind of, all the stuff kind of came at me, and things I hadn't dealt with before and hadn't thought about. And it was in a really dark place, with anxiety, depression. It was very, very challenging, and I got help. I mean, I've never been afraid to get help. It's something I did even, in my 20s, when I needed it. But this was like probably the worst I'd been in terms of mental health, and the lowest point. And I reached out, I got help, and I think it changed me. I mean, it changed me as a person. I did so much work, Sarah. I was doing therapy on a regular basis, and it was very hard and very exhausting. But I said, I'm not going to use this time and do nothing with it. I need to figure out how I can be a better version of me and how I can process things that I'm going through. So I let myself have that time.
Hi, I'm Connie Thiessen, the host of Broadcast Dialogue, the podcast. We focus on Canada and the challenges facing Canadian radio and TV, as well as highlighting those moving the industry forward from podcasting and streaming to new broadcast tech. Check us out at broadcastdialogue.com or your favorite podcast app.
What happens when we play outside? We become healthier, both mentally and physically. We become more creative and more focused. We connect with nature, each other, and ourselves. Let's Take This Outside, a new podcast hosted by me, Marianne Iveson, an aspiring outdoor athlete and nature lover. I speak to athletes, outdoor professionals, and scientists about their connection to nature, how it affects their performance, and everyday life. Let's Take This Outside, available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Google Podcasts, and at letstakethisoutside.ca.
What you just said about the train makes so much sense. I feel like I've definitely felt that, where we're so good at just like compartmentalizing and then walking away onto the next thing. And like add to that the layer of being a mother, add to that the layer of the loss that you experienced, and you know, recognizing that you got to do something for you there. You could have even made it about the family situation, but you recognized that it was much deeper and it was something in you, and that's why you had felt, I guess, triggered at that point. What's one of the like most helpful tools that came out of that for you that you would offer up to someone going through that?
I think I wasn't afraid to get on medication, which there's a big stigma about. So I think that was key. I think it really helped me. I knew when to get off it. I knew when I needed it. I knew, like I was aware of it, and I don't think I could have gone through this journey without it. I think there's two things that have to happen at the same time for some people, for like me, who were going through this depression and anxiety. There was, the medication and then the therapy. And I think they kind of go hand in hand. The other thing that was interesting, I just kept feeling guilty about it. I kept saying to my doctor, who's a friend of mine, I was telling her, am I making this up? Like, am I just being dramatic? Like, is this real? She's like, no, I can hear it in your voice. Like you're going through something. Like, this is not something you're making up. And I thought, but people are going through such worse things. Like I'm being silly. This is silly. Like, and she said, no, like I want to medicate you. This is serious what you're going through. Some of the things you're telling me are pretty dark. So anyway, it was like, I didn't even believe myself.
Yeah.
And because we're so used to being strong and saying, I'm going to work. I'm fine. I can go back to work. And I remember I kept telling the same bosses, Ward Smith, I kept saying to him, I'll come back next week. I'll come back next week. I'll come back next week. And he said to me, Farah, like, you're asking my permission. You have to ask your own permission. Like, you will not be penalized even a bit in your career for taking this time. Take it. I'm telling you, like, he was forcing me to take more time because he thought he heard also that I wasn't well in the way that I would speak to him. So I think we have to trust ourselves. I didn't trust myself.
Wow, this Mackay fellow might deserve his own episode of Women in Media.
Well, there's two. There's Mackay and there's also Ward. Both of them. Yeah, they're such champions of women, both of them. And I can't tell you. And my co-anchor Alan, like they just, all three of them. I'm very lucky.
I've heard the name so many times also through Morgan, and like she has felt the same type of support when she's been going through tough stuff too. So I love that. I have certainly not experienced that level of support, and I almost feel like in the HR departments that I have had, that it's an afterthought. It's we just got to cross the T's and dot the I's here.
Yeah.
Even taking a mental health leave, like making that decision, like there's stigma against that as well, right? So. Yeah.
And that stigma, like to me, now I see it as like people who are stigmatizing what's going on in their lives. Like whenever somebody criticizes it's usually something to do with them.
Yeah, it's a trigger for them.
Yeah, it's a trigger for them. Maybe they need a mental health. Maybe they need maybe they need to look internally, and I kind of feel bad in a way for people like that who don't, and especially in my community, because it's still very taboo, as it is in every community probably, but it makes me so sad that people feel like they can't,
Yeah.
you know, get
When
the
you
help
say
that they probably
community,
need.
when you say community, are you talking about like your colleagues at work, or you're talking about?
That's a good question. Both.
Okay.
Yeah, definitely my work community for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think you're still looked at as kind of less than when you're going on
Oh,
these,
for sure.
you
Yeah.
know, and on mental health. Even though a lot of people have done it, I still think you're looked at as like, oh, you couldn't handle it, you couldn't cut it. We go through such difficult things at work. We see so many horrible things in news, and it's and people are like, well, you couldn't cut it. That's how I feel like it seemed. But yeah, like I don't see it that way. I think we're all individuals, we're all built in different ways, so yeah. Also my ethnic community, where it's like, so I'm Muslim, my parents are from East Africa, I was born here, and I have a mom, thankfully, who was woke before woke was a thing.
Yes.
Yeah, she just is like, I mean, like her best friend in the 80s was gay, and she just like it, which is like in our community, again, never would have thought. She had people who were, anyway, anybody who had issues in life would come to my mom because they knew she was so understanding and wouldn't judge. And even my friends still to this day will talk to her, will call her up. So I was lucky to have that. So I never saw it as a stigma. I never thought it made you less than, or it was a problem to ask for help, because I knew she did when she needed it.
Mm-hmm. How has your ethnicity impacted your career, good and bad? Because I know you've won an award for some of your work.
Yeah,
On this as well.
Yeah, I did a lot of work on the racial reckoning before it was kind of a mainstream topic, and that was challenging because, a lot of the leaders that we have are not diverse, and it was mostly white guys at the top, right? So you're trying to convince them what's a story and what's not a story. And I was really fascinated with intersectionality, which is, being a person of color, but also being gay, for example, or being, having these kind of layers of who you are, and how that changes things. So Ali Wilson, my producer, and I, we produced this show called Living in Color, which I'm really proud of. And it was about that. And all our topics were kind of different things, but how they affect people of color. And it was hard because sometimes we'd say, well, this is a story, and the group of white guys in the boardroom that are green lighting our episodes are like, that's not a story. And it's like, no, we're telling you, like, this is a story, There's been challenges in that part, in that, and there's been, and again, I go back to what people have inside them, right? So that word racist is so charged, right? Nobody wants to be called a racist. And so whenever I'd point stuff out, and this is at Global, this is at City, it's like at CB24, like whenever you'd point stuff out, there's some people who would get their back up. And it's interesting to me that it was always those people who were kind of looking internally and being like, wait a minute, am I racist? Did I think that way? And those are the people who kind of, instead of taking it as a learning moment, they would get a little bit defensive.
Which is really easy to do, to learn from things like that.
Totally. And I think we're in a different world now, because I think a lot of people, they would, I think a lot of people, like, now we know, right? We're learning, but I think back then it wasn't thought of. It was just kind of like, what are you talking about? This doesn't exist. And I'm like, no, I'm telling you it exists. Like, I promise you this exists. This is a thing.
Yeah. And
I remember saying before the pandemic, like, race is the biggest story of our time, because there were so many like culture wars in ways, and now we're seeing it. Like, now it's all the time on the news. There's so many. Yeah. And it's validated, sadly. Like, I wish I was wrong.
Have you ever felt that as a target in a newsroom?
The only thing I felt is people saying, and I heard this recently, which was, she got her job because of it. I mean, I didn't hear it, but somebody told me that somebody said it.
Oh my God, I'm getting so angry for you.
Yeah. So it's that stuff still bothers me, that,
sure.
You got your job because you're brown. And to me, I think, to be honest, I think I was hired at Global, which was a very white network when I was hired there, because I brought a different perspective. But I don't think I would have been hired if I wasn't also good at my job.
Right.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I think it's great that I can bring my perspective to it, but I don't think they would hire me if I sucked, and I don't think I would make it to national if I was a horrible, reporter. So I know in myself, but it's sad that there's still colleagues who say things like that. Right. And there's still people who think like that. And not just to me, to a lot of other people like me in the news. And it's funny. My girlfriend and I, we call it like brown girl syndrome, where we're just kind of always trying to prove ourselves. And I feel like I've gotten to this point where now I'm like, I don't need to prove it to you. Like, I don't need to. I know my worth, and I'm good.
This is coming out of the therapy, right? You're like,
totally 100%.
No, absolutely not.
No,
I don't
100%.
tolerate that.
Yeah. And I think that was part of it. Like, I had this real thing about one of the biggest issues that I worked in therapy was my perfectionism, right? Like, just feeling like, because I was a little bit different, I had to be perfect all the time. My English had to be perfect. Everything had to be perfect. I had to look the part, and I had to be fully made up and everything had to look right. And now that stuff is not as important to me,
Also on the topic of like ethnicity, I mean, you mentioned a couple things that aren't really like, we'll call it accepted in Muslim religion. Would you say that you've been able to bring some of the more positive parts of that religion to maybe your viewers?
Yeah. I mean, I think after 9/11, it was really hard. I think it was hard for a lot of us, right? Like, and I mean, I had a friend who had nothing to do with anything and had a flyer of like a flying something helicopter ride something and got, CSIS was after him and thought he was like up to no good. And so there's so many people like that who have stories. And so we all kind of went through stuff. But I think the world has come a long way. Unfortunately, Islamophobia is big time on the rise right now. Yeah. And, we have a law in Quebec that, doesn't let people practice freedom of religion. So stories like that. And I mean, I didn't interview the Prime Minister. And that was one of the things that I was just hammering him on. And I hadn't seen him asked in that way, that question, because it just, to me, these things are so obvious. Yet it's not something that's talked about in a mainstream way, in my opinion, where it should be. Yeah.
Did he dodge, in your opinion?
Oh, yeah. If you watch the interview, 100%. He dodged. I mean, I feel like he knows, but it's, it's a lot of politics behind everything. And I didn't expect to get a straightforward answer, but it's just a story that I wish we'd focus on more, and not just anti-Muslim hate, anti-Semitism. There's just so much happening in this country, and we need to pay attention to it.
For sure. So tell me about your favorite interview ever.
Oh my gosh.
Or a couple, if you're like, I can't choose.
Oh my God. I don't even know. I honestly, I mean, I had a good one the other day. I talked to the chief negotiator from Ukraine. That was really cool to kind of hear from him. Yeah. Like, when do you get to talk to the guy who's in charge of all, like the whole New World Order. And I was able to, we aired some of it. I talked to him for a long time, and it's just so fascinating speaking to people who are really like right there doing the thing, and that's always really cool. One of my favorite interviews actually was an interview where both the interview subject and I cried, which was Julie Black. And it was about, and Julie will tell you, did you already interview her? You already interviewed her. It's too bad you guys could have talked about this, because her and I, like, even when we talk about this interview, we start tearing up. But
is she one of your pals now?
Yeah. I love
that.
She's such a great person. She's just such a good person.
I told her she needs to host her own podcast. So hopefully that, if anything, that comes out of today.
Maybe. Yeah. She has so much on the go. Fun fact, I was in one of her music videos. Funny enough.
Which one?
It was, oh God, was it last year or 2 years? Was it during the pandemic? I can't even remember. It was a few years ago. She got a bunch of women who she admires and is friends with, and we all dressed like boss babes, and that was kind of the theme of the music video, and it was really cool. But she we both, and it was about race. It was the first time she'd kind of opened up. It was a series I was doing called First Time I Was Called, and she was talking about the first time she was called the N-word on public transit, and it was like, she's like, this is the first time I've told this story, and she just started crying, and I started crying, and it was just this powerful moment of two people who are not in the interview room right now. We are in a different, we're just, our hearts are both speaking to each other. And it was, you don't often get interviews like that where it's just so true, it's so real, that relationship, that bond.
And you could certainly resonate with that experience.
Exactly. And again, nobody was talking about this before. Like, nobody was talking about anything like this. So doing these stories, you put them up online, and the amount of hate you get, like, it was just, you'd have to turn off your phone. Like, it was crazy. So, and again,
what was the name of that series again?
First Time I Was Called.
What a great name for a series.
Oh,
I'm going to try
thanks.
to embed that in the
Oh,
blog
that'd be
page
great.
when
That'd be
I
great.
post this.
I'm really proud of it.
But it's funny you say that, like on the topic of like hate and trolls, she had just shared, right? Like something not so good that came out of her switch of one word in the anthem. I mean, you're in a public position, so it's bound to happen. How do you deal with that stuff if someone online is coming at you?
You know what? I actually have pulled back from Twitter quite a bit. So
You
I
found
think,
most of it was there?
yeah, it was all on Twitter. So I basically just really post interviews I've done or fact-based things. There's nothing that's, Donna Friesen, who's the weekday anchor, we had a conversation. She kind of inspired me. She's like, what's the point? Like, why do you need to do it? Like, you don't need to. You just get all this hate afterwards. So, and I said, you're right. You're totally right. It's silly. Like, I'm going to fight with all these people? Like, it doesn't make any sense. So, now I just post what I want to. Things are not as maybe, controversial when I post. And, yeah, I keep it there as just showcase some of the work I do, but I really try not to, like, I'm very thoughtful about what I put on because I don't want to deal with the hate after. It's just, it just gets to be sometimes too much. But there was a time where it was, there was people who thought my husband was a terrorist, and there was a guy who was like super convinced and said he knew my address and he was coming to my house. And
that's scary.
Yeah. And like to say things about my family that are not true. Like that was really hard. People were talking about my kids. Like it just mean horrible, horrible things. Like I'd get rape threats. I'd get death threats. Like there was so many things. And it was just, and people saying that they know where you live, they know where you are. And yeah, that was tough.
Tell me about the most empowered moment that you have felt in your entire career. Because for some people, it is an award or something that validates what they've been working so hard for, getting the anchoring job, right? Like things like that.
And maybe that's it. Like it was standing there on the first day at Global, like at anchoring, being a Muslim woman to anchor pregnant to anchor a newscast. Like it was kind of surreal. It was like, how are both these things happening in tandem? And they had like a huge campaign launch, so my face was everywhere, like buses and billboards and everywhere. And I remember my dad just like I took him on the subway to see the posters, and he was just his face, like his smile, like he would have never thought when it came to Canada. His daughter's face would be plastered everywhere, his pregnant daughter. And it was just this, I guess it was just this really cool moment of this kind of full circle. Is it? I guess maybe not. It's a straight line because it's going to keep going, but it was this moment of pride where it's, my parents had nothing when they came here. They were both victims of racism. My grandparents, everybody, they all lived in one tiny apartment, all my uncles and aunts, and now here, my uncle rode the TTC from Kipling to Scarborough, and my dad, and they stopped at every stop and they tried to get jobs. They tried to get a job when they first came to Canada. They rode the whole subway and they didn't get one job. They weren't offered one job, and they were both engineers.
Come on.
Yeah. And then being in that same subway on the Bloor line, like seeing my face on the subway and then seeing my face on the poster with my dad. It was just this moment where it was like, wow, like it's going to be okay.
This is the stuff dreams are made of. That is a full circle moment for sure.
Yeah. It was
okay.
Cool.
Is there anything we need to know about that you are working on now that, people can watch on your socials or on Global for like anything special coming out?
Yeah, I'm working on a show for the New Reality, our news magazine show about dementia that I'm very excited about, and the future of dementia treatment. That's something I'm super interested in about. I've also just been named celebrated ambassador for Plan Canada, which I'm also very, very excited about.
Sweet.
And one thing there I really want to talk about is actually menstrual health, because I think that's something we don't discuss often enough. I like talking about things like we did with race a few years ago that nobody wants to discuss. Because I'm not scared to talk about that. And I think it's going to be something we're going to be talking about in a few years anyway. It's just going to take a little while for everybody else to get there. So that's interesting. Those are some cool things. Yeah.
I'll make sure that I get some links for those things so we can put them in the episode notes. Mm-hmm. And thank you so much for doing this. I want to end with your nominations. Who do you think should come on and share their stories that you love and admire?
There's so many. Okay. I would say Sangeeta Patel. She's a good friend of mine.
Honestly, I want to work out with her.
Oh my God. Doesn't everybody? She's amazing. She's just amazing. She's just such a good person. And who else? Pooja Honda. She's also a friend of mine. Arti Pol with CBC. She's also great. Yeah, I think those right now are ones that I can think of. My best friend you might want to talk to, Naomi Parnas. She was in the industry for a long time and left, and now is like kick-ass like partner in her company. And she has totally she's left the business, and she can tell you all about what it was like to be a woman in the business, and had to leave because she didn't feel like she could raise a family at the same time. And now she's making way more money than anybody I know. So she's doing it in spades, and I'm so happy for her.
Well, thank you so much for, sharing so much of your story. And again, I admire how you handled all the mental health stuff. And I mean, everything you've just told me about even your ethnicity, you should be so proud of how you're portraying everything to not only viewers, but the family that you have.
Thank you very much. That's very sweet. Thank you.
Hi friends, it's Carrie Dahl. Thank you so much for venturing into the inner circle with me. If you subscribe to my podcast and have been listening for a while, thank you. I appreciate you. If you're new, welcome to my circle, where the power of story is honored, and I believe all voices need and deserve to be heard. As a former news anchor turned podcast host and public speaking coach, I know that stories are the most powerful way we connect as human beings. I feel privileged so many of you trust me with your stories, whether in my private Inner Circle Facebook group or right here on my podcast. Your story is your gift. Thank you for allowing me to share it with the world.
The Inner Circle with Carrie Dahl, available on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, and at carriedahl.co.
Another Sound Off Media Company podcast.